I think that you're probably in this room today because you're very interested in growing your business. And exporting is one way to grow a business. Whether China is the right market for you is one question, but even before you contemplate that, you really need to be confident that you're ready for export. And for 30 years or thereabouts, I've been passionate about exporting. But there are risks involved. It takes a lot of time and energy. It takes a lot of careful preparation, but it can be fulfilling, it can be rewarding, both personally and in a business sense. And I hope that in the few slides that follow that I can draw your attention to some of the things that you really need to consider if you're going to contemplate taking your business to the world stage. Now, exporting is not for everybody. Exporting is not for the faint-hearted. It's not something to be entered into lightly. It's not something you should contemplate just because you have a temporary downturn in your domestic market or because you have a temporary surplus in stock. If your reason for getting into export isn't one of these that's on the screen or a couple of them, then it's likely that your initiative is not going to be underpinned by the very ingredients of export success, which are long-term view, management commitment, perseverance, and the development in your organisation of an export culture. And without a genuine business reason for getting into the export game, the likelihood is that you'll fail, probably because you won't be able to justify the continuing and drawn-out commitment of time, energy, and resources. But if you do have a good reason for getting into export, then you need to ask yourself a few questions. What are the factors that contribute to your domestic success? And what is the profile of your customer base? What is it that differentiates your product or service from those of your competitors? And then you have to ask yourself whether and to what extent those factors are translatable to an offshore marketplace. And if they are, it'll help you also to determine which markets might be more prospective than others. And you might need to modify your product for a whole range of reasons. It could be something simple like changing the labelling or packaging, but it could be a major design change, and you have to decide, can you do that? Are you prepared to do that? And is it financially viable? And if you undertake some broad market research, it's odds on that you'll find some of the pointers to answer those questions. Now, if you've established that you've got clear export potential, then it's very likely that as you move down the export journey, your prospective partner is going to deal with every aspect of your organisation, from yourself, marketing and sales, to order and dispatch, after-sales service, finance. And if there's not an export culture in your organisation where everybody realises that this is strategically important and they're prepared to be flexible and to adapt themselves to different cultures and different business norms, then you're setting yourself up for some difficult times. Management commitment is absolutely essential. If an export initiative, an export company, is not driven in a determined way from the top, then it's very likely to have some rocky roads ahead of it. You'll need to budget for and allocate the resources and the skills necessary to sustain your export initiative. And you've still got to keep your eye on the domestic market while you do that, because in the lead time to export success, you've still got to have your cash turnover. You need to understand very well your business and how it compares to your competitors, especially those that you'll come across in the offshore market that you don't come across back home. And finally, if you do find an export opportunity, you have to ask yourself the question, do I have the capacity to respond to it? So if you're export capable, then are you export ready? Being export ready really means that you are able to respond professionally to an export opportunity as soon as it presents itself. And perhaps something here that some people tend to overlook, in my experience, a clear pricing model. And drawing from some of the comments that we've heard earlier, in the Chinese context, the Chinese businessman is negotiating even as he writes the cheque. And when you've shaken hands on the price, that's when he'll start asking you about the free product for in-market promotion, the point of sale material, and so on. And if you haven't built that into your pricing model to start with, then it's likely the whole thing will unravel even then. Be honest about your weaknesses. If you understand where you're not really strong, then at least you can take the measures to mitigate the risk or to eliminate it altogether. And if they're not recognised, then it's very likely that they'll cause a hiccup in the business, and probably that's going to be at the wrong time. It might be that an honest appraisal of your weaknesses, not just your strengths, will determine whether you export directly or whether you engage an agent or whether you engage a consultant to do it for you, whether you export indirectly through the internet or otherwise. It's important to research your market. The offshore markets are not the same as Australia, and you'll need to understand the differences in the business practices, in particular the regulatory regimes and the requirements of the different language, of the different culture, the different social structures, and how this affects the way you go about your business. And remember, as some of our speakers have said this morning already, the playing field is not always as level as it is in Australia. In my experience, Australia is the only level playing field in the world. Once you've established an export opportunity and decided to take advantage of it, other things then start to become very important and urgent. How do you best minimise the risks associated with the legal and financial transaction that you're about to enter into? And what is it that you need to control, and what is it that you can let your business partner offshore control? How will you get your money, and when? And you need to get your pricing right, and that needs to be reflected in your documentation. If the customer is seeking FOB, FCA, CIF, ex-works, do you know what that means? Is it reflected in your documentation? Does your documentation nominate the date of the Incoterms? Because Incoterms 2000 is still legal, it still works, but it's not the same as Incoterms 2010. The time to come to grips with these matters is before you begin. Getting paid is always a problem. Not getting paid can be an even bigger problem. And from the outset, you need to decide what payment method is going to work for you and minimise your risk. And much depends on the value of the transaction and the nature of the transaction. If you have a small transaction and you're dealing business to consumer, it might be that a credit card or a telegraphic transfer is sufficient. If you're dealing with a large transaction or supplying a distributor, it might be that a letter of credit would be the best way to go. In China, prepayment is a normal way of doing business. Try ordering something from China. Your order won't even get started until it's paid for. If you're quoting in Australian dollars, you need to manage the risk of currency fluctuation. And to address that, start early talking to your bank. If your collections are being made offshore by an agent or a subsidiary company or a distributor, then make sure that you know how and when you can get your money out of the country. And when you've decided on the transaction and the business is going well, the next thing you've got to do is ship the goods. The best thing you can do is talk to some specialists who really understand the business, your freight forwarders, your customs agents, your business consultants who've been there and done that. The requirements will differ at both ends of the market depending on the marketplace that you're addressing and the regulatory environment of the offshore market that you've chosen. And it's the homework that's done in these early stages and before you begin that enables you to respond to that opportunity and ship the goods in a professional and timely manner. You've got to take account of the risk of loss or damage in transit. Especially for a small business, a significant uninsured loss can actually cripple your business, domestically and export.